this session on innovation. It's my pleasure to be in conversation with Hrishikesha. 20 years of experience in innovation, 2 books to his credit, and we talk about what's kind of driven his research and all that's kind of gone into it. The books, I think, for those who haven't read it, they're a must-read. If you're interested in the innovation story on India, 2 very different approaches to innovation. And I'd start by asking Hrishikesh the whole focus of the first book, which was around Jugaad to systematic innovation, and what drove him to write a second book.
Thank you, Indrajit. As he mentioned, I've been working in the field of innovation now for about 20 years. And I had the advantage of being able to see innovation in India across various levels. My father ran his own company where for almost 20 years he created a whole range of products in the telecommunication area. I then had the opportunity to study innovation in a more academic setting when I looked at research institutions run by the government. I've worked with lots of companies and tried to understand their innovation activities. So I think I've had the fortuitous advantage of having a ringside seat of what's been happening in innovation in India over the last couple of decades. So one of the questions which kept on cropping up is why is India not innovating as much as it should be able to, particularly when we also observe that we have lots of talented people. So when you come to the individual in Indian organizations, clearly individuals have considerable talent, but somehow the organizations are not able to put that talent together to create the kind of quantum and quality of innovation that one might expect. All of this got catalyzed when I spent a couple of months as a visiting fellow at the University of Pennsylvania in 2008, when a lot of people started asking me the question, just as the US has lost lots of manufacturing jobs, just as we've lost lots of services jobs, are we going to lose the innovation jobs next? Is innovation going to shift to India? And should we be worried? This was a question I often heard when I was in the US. And somehow this, to me, didn't seem to be a real threat. Somehow I thought that, India didn't really pose a threat to the US on the innovation front. And I just decided to put all that I had studied during the previous 15 years or so, capture all of that in my first book. And my conclusion was essentially that India needs to change the way it does innovation. We need to look at it right from the policy level. We need to look at it at the organizational level as well. And we need to be able to address and create this, the kind of processes that are required to make innovation a more planned and organized event rather than something just depending on chance.
At a time when we're celebrating Jugaad, who has the time for more structured approach to innovation?
I think this whole debate on Jugaad has got a little bit out of hand, but let me just tell you where I stand on that. First of all, I think that we are actually facing 2 different problems when we look at multinationals in the West and we look at organizations in India. If you look at large multinationals, they have become quite fossilized in their processes. Many of them have become very risk averse. They've also become quite slow in innovation. They're so cautious that they take an awfully long time to, for example, get a new product into the market. So to the US multinational or even the European multinational, the idea of embracing a more sort of open form of innovation, a more form of an innovation that has less constraints seems very attractive. That's one of the reasons a book which has a similar title to mine but is quite different in content, a book called Jugaad Innovation by a group of 3 people from the US and outside India. Their focus is more on how do we make companies more flexible to undertake innovation. I think India actually has exactly the opposite problem. I think we have lots of creative improvisation. As you all know, we have a long history of adapting to all the constraints which the government and everybody else puts around us. But because we have got into that mode, which is a very short-term, let's fix it kind of a mode, we are not able to create the innovation capabilities that create more impactful innovation or that create more sustainable innovation. And we also have the other problem that we are often not able to scale up. We're able to do things very locally in one context or another, but when it comes to making something that's robust and scalable, we seem to struggle.
So in your research, in the last 10 years, the big change that's happened is that a lot of our frontline business organizations have started taking the first steps towards building a global business. Now, for those organizations, because they tend to be the guys who leading the way in terms of innovation, what did your research find? How would they stack up on a global scale in terms of their ability to innovate and do it on a sustained kind of basis? If you were to look at the sheer capacity to innovate, where would that place them?
Sure. So if you look at Indian companies, and I'm just moving now to my newer book, the one which just came out a few months ago, we identified that Indian companies in general seem to face three problems or three challenges in the innovation process. The first is some companies find that they're not even able to generate enough ideas. Somehow the environment or the culture within the organization does not promote the bubbling up of enough ideas to take innovation forward. So we call this the pipeline problem. Essentially, you don't have a robust idea pipeline. Another set of organizations said that, it's not so much ideation that's a problem, but the problem we are facing is that the ideas don't seem to move forward. They seem to get stuck or they seem to get lost. So a year later, when we look back at the ideas we were talking about a year ago, we don't know what happened to those ideas. They seem to have sort of not got acted upon. So we call this a velocity problem. The ideas are not having enough momentum to move forward in the organization. And the third challenge some companies reported to us was, it's not an idea problem. We have enough ideas. We even think we are able to work on them, but somehow we're not seeing impact. We're not seeing those ideas translating into big tangible outcomes for the organization. And that's what we call the batting average problem. We just gave it a cricket metaphor to sort of say, that's really the kind of challenge they face. So when we started looking at Indian companies more closely, we found that some of the companies actually addressing some of these problems quite well. So if I just take some examples, if you look at a company like Cognizant, which is among the IT services companies being the top performer in the last few years, Cognizant has what they call a managed innovation program, where they've tried to involve a whole lot of their associates in the innovation process. And one result of this has been that they've been able to solve the pipeline problem pretty well. Just to give you some numbers, last year, the 150,000 employees of Cognizant came up with 130,000 ideas, which is about one idea per person. Certainly not at the benchmark of the best innovators, but certainly far better than what most organizations were doing before. A second element we saw that companies in India seem to be addressing much better was the question of participation. How do you get more people involved? One of the companies that stands out for us on that dimension is Titan Industries. Titan, all of you know, it's a leader in watches and jewelry. And they have set a very ambitious, in fact, almost audacious goal that they want every employee of their organization to be involved in innovation by 2015. And they're not just letting that be a goal, but they're translating that into action by organizing training programs so that everybody in the organization gets exposure to creative problem-solving techniques. They also get an opportunity to exercise those techniques on problems which the company has identified, which are valuable to the company. And the impact of this has been huge improvements in productivity in the jewelry business, and that's been one of the big drivers of the fantastic results we have seen in the jewelry business over the last 5 or 6 years. Certainly on the pipeline issue, I can see that some of these Indian companies have actually been doing a pretty good job.
Some would argue that the next big thing on that front would be what Procter & Gamble's done, which is to open the boundaries of the organization and let ideas from outside come in and influence change. Their whole Connect and Develop program is considered a best practice. Alan Lafley is, in fact, the guy who architected it is now back.
That's right.
How do you see any examples of that in Indian corporations as you look around of companies who have allowed the ideas from outside the organization to come in and change the way that they look at the ideas pipeline?
Sure. So there are actually the two sets of organizations in the open innovation context. One set of organizations actually don't do too much innovation internally. I'll give you an example. Eureka Forbes is an example of that. So they understand that they have a huge advantage because they have such presence in the Indian water purification market. And their brands are almost household names. And thanks to that, they know that they have the ability to take new water purification technologies to the market. The fact that they have that advantage means that they're a natural target for people who are trying to license out water purification technologies. And for example, last year they had one new product which had an advertising campaign, something called a Ketanu magnet. I don't know if you remember, you might have seen the ads around that, which is essentially a non-chemical way of removing even bacteria and viruses and so on from water. And that's something they licensed from a US company. And they have made it very clear to the external world that they are very open to taking in new technologies, and therefore many companies sort of make a beeline for Eureka Forbes. That's one way in which we see open innovation happening. The other way in which we see open innovation happening is the interesting approach which some companies like Tata Motors in the case of Indica and Mahindra in the case of Scorpio have adopted, where essentially what they did was they were the innovator at the system level. They sort of understood the market and knew what kind of product they were trying to create, but they realized they did not have many of the individual component technologies and know-how which were required. So they contracted with foreign vendors to bring in the technologies which they lacked. But they did one interesting thing, particularly Mahindra's in the case of Scorpio. It would have been prohibitively expensive to go and source many of those technologies from the world's top vendors. So instead what they did was they went and looked for second-tier vendors who had the expertise but didn't necessarily have the brand and who were quite keen to work with a company like Mahindra. Many of these companies were from Korea, from Taiwan, from other countries. And they used their inputs to fill in all the gaps for the Scorpio. And what Mahindra really did was manage this whole thing from a system integration and system design kind of perspective. So far at least, yeah, I think they've been quite creative in using all these diverse inputs to drive innovation.
You talked about Titan and giving workers the tools and techniques to really stir and stimulate innovation. In terms of organizational design, do you see any big changes in the way companies are thinking, or Indian companies are thinking about triggering innovation? Because Indian organizations have had an issue of being too hierarchy bound, not paying too lip service to diversity, not doing enough to push the envelope in terms of looking at interdisciplinary skills. Is there change on the envelope, to your mind?
Yeah, I think that continues to be somewhat of a challenge area for many organizations. We have seen, I think, quite strong processes being created in some companies. I gave you the example of Cognizant, where this whole idea management system seems to have percolated quite strongly across the organization. And in fact, innovation has got incorporated into a lot of the measurement systems of the company as well. So we do have some examples like that. I think other companies have approached the innovation problem in a slightly different way. If you look at companies within the Tata Group, for example, they have been quite strong at creating individual innovation forums within their group companies and creating an umbrella Tata Group Innovation Forum at the apex level, where one of the interesting things they've been doing at the group level is to get different companies to collaborate with each other. For example, many of you would be familiar that for their water purification, they actually got Tata Chemicals, they got Titan, they got 3 or 4 different group companies to get together to create a new product. So that's one advantage that a group like the Tatas have, that they have diverse expertise, but it's spread across companies. So they're trying to create mechanisms for the companies to collaborate with each other.
I wanted to focus your attention on leadership, because there's often a perception that the Indica or the Nano wouldn't have happened without a charismatic leader like Ratan Tata, who had the vision to really see where Tata Motors needed to go. Now that he's gone, people are asking questions whether Tata Motors has innovation now embedded as a deep capability. I don't know what the answer is, but if you were to look around other organizations other than the Tatas, what is it that you find? What role does leadership really play?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think as far as big ticket innovation is concerned, those innovation projects which involve large investments, I think the interest of the top management is going to continue to be very critical. And in India, we know, if you look back at our business houses historically, many of them came from a trading background. They didn't actually have a very strong expertise in technology. And traditionally, their comfort level has been much higher with investing in manufacturing capacity or even in more recently in brand building rather than investing in innovation. That's been a bit of I think, a challenge area for them. So I think in those organizations, I'm quite clear that the top management does have a pretty significant role to play. I find it difficult to imagine that the Nano would have come out of Tata Motors or even some of the products in Mahindra without Ratan Tata or Anand Mahindra blessing, and sometimes even more than blessing, getting actively involved. I mean, if any of you have read the accounts of the creation of the Nano, you would know that over that period, Ratan Tata, every weekend that he was free, he actually used to fly down to Pune to spend time with the Nano development team. So I think at one level, that's probably true. But I think at another level, there's a very different aspect of leadership which can come to play in innovation. Firstly, I think we might be making a mistake if we try to jump directly into breakthrough and very large innovations. In fact, many organizations believe that what they need to do is build up what is called creative confidence. In fact, so Sukumar, who is the Chief Innovation Officer of Cognizant, he believes his task is to make people believe in themselves and believe that they can do it. And rather than shooting straight away for big ticket stuff, he believes that it's better to build that up ground up. So if you look at what Cognizant has done, they've not really invested in these huge innovation projects, but instead they've tried to say, how can we bring innovation into almost every project that we are doing? Can we sort of decentralize innovation, if you like? And to make that happen, they have trained a lot of their managers in how do we be catalysts to innovation. There's an interesting way of looking at it. So the manager's role may not be to innovate himself or herself, but the catalyst or the manager's role is to support other people who are involved in innovation in their day-to-day activity. So I see a lot of interesting thinking on leadership in terms of pushing, leadership of innovation down in the organization so that a lot of the regular work has a much higher of component of innovation in it.
So in effect, you're saying that you need two almost different pathways to radical and incremental innovation. Would that be correct?
I think broadly that would be correct. You can't expect to manage both incremental innovation and radical innovation in the same process. The risks involved are very different, the returns, the time horizon, all of these vary greatly across these kinds of projects. I think there is a lot of scope, first of all, to increase even the scope of incremental innovation so that your incremental innovation becomes bigger in its scope and its impact. And hopefully that will also build that creative confidence that can then lead to bigger innovation happening in the company.
I wanted to just move the conversation to something a little wider, which is to look at the whole role of collaboration and collaborative action among industry players. The big breakthrough innovations often require industry standards to be set, and that requires industry players to come together. And that's been a bit of an issue in India because very few people seem to have the vision to really forge industry-wide alliances. Electric vehicle technology or even telecom, a lot of the stuff that's happening, standards don't necessarily get set. Now, is that a particular malice with Indian industry that industry players don't see the value of collaborative action in setting standards or kind of coming together to create supporting infrastructure for innovation to happen?
I think historically we have had some issues when collaboration is concerned. We've not seen too many examples in India of companies or even companies and other institutions working together very closely to enhance and take on bigger and more challenging innovation projects. It's interesting, just a couple of years ago, I was reading an article in one of the top biotechnology magazines in the world, and their editorial team had visited India, and when they went back, they had written about the Indian biotech industry. One of the first comments, maybe in the first paragraph itself, was how they were so surprised to find how little collaboration there was between companies in India, and how anywhere else in the world they had seen huge amounts of collaboration happening in the biotech industry. There are, I think, a few important reasons why this might be the case. One reason is that in India, many times companies have not been built based on specialized capabilities. In fact, most Indian companies are characterized by more general capabilities. I mean, if you take, for example, you take the Tata Group, clearly they have very strong management capabilities that go across the spectrum. But maybe they don't have very deep technological capabilities in a particular area. You're more likely to see collaboration when you have organizations which have very deep expertise and need to collaborate with somebody else in order to complement or sort of substitute and supplant whatever they don't have themselves. So you can just see that in the IT services, right? If you look at all the large IT services companies, they span every activity under the sun in IT services. They'll have maintenance, they'll have infrastructure management, they'll have testing, they'll have software development, everything. So there's no great surprise that there's not a whole lot of collaboration between them and other companies, because they have almost everything they need under their own roof. So I think there are some reasons for that. Others may be, of course, more in the realm of sociology and things like that. But yes, I think I would broadly agree with you that the ability to collaborate does seem to be a problem. Interestingly, Indian companies seem to be able to collaborate much better with foreign companies, but not among themselves within India.
But from your perch at IIM Bangalore, you would also have an interesting bird's eye view of how receptive Indian corporations are to collaborating with academia, because in Stanford or any other institute, that's been a huge crucible of innovation, right? Do you see that changing at all? Because one does hear, for instance, the IITs now emerging as at least a potential hub for innovation. They're kind of seeding startups and companies going to them and throwing. ICICI, in fact, was one of the few that I know of where they've gone and thrown some business problems and challenges at some of those communities. Is that something that we really more than we have?
I think if you look at the experience of Indian academic institutions, you will find that they don't have as much collaboration with companies as they would have, say, in the West. Partly it's a problem in industry and academia understanding each other. If you go to the US, you will find that there's a fair amount of mobility. People have worked in industry, they've also worked in a university setting. In short, university and industry seem to speak, or at least be able to understand each other well. They have the ability to converse with each other. In India, we have been rather deficient on mobility, right? So if you're in industry, you're in industry. If you're in academia, you're in academia, and never the twain will meet kind of thing. So we don't have enough people who can play that sort of boundary spanning role, who can actually link companies and academia together. Having said that, it's also true that Indian companies particularly have not collaborated so much with academia, perhaps because they didn't feel the need to. They were able to source technology from elsewhere. They were not under severe competitive pressure. But it's interesting, the moment companies start wanting to develop their individual or independent leadership, things can change. For example, if you go to the automotive sector, you will find that a company like Tata Motors, which clearly is much more ambitious in the automotive space, has enhanced the amount of collaboration and work it does with academic institutions. So it's also about Indian companies and what are their aspirations and how they want to interact with academic institutions.
You talked about Mahindra's as well as an example of now you do need lightning rods. I mean, Pawan Goenka's entry obviously did give them a lot more option to play with. Given the fact that some of our best scientific brains are working outside the country than inside, is there an opportunity to really create a better conducive environment for them not to necessarily come back to this country and do all their research, but to at least spend maybe 20% of their time, maybe 10%, maybe 15% of the time? Has the government, to your mind, done enough to make it much more attractive? The Chinese have.
No, I don't think. See, the government in India has been, at least by Chinese standards, very timid in the way it has tried to facilitate the return of Indian academicians abroad to Indian institutions. A lot of the salary constraints and working conditions and so on still remain as they were several years ago. So to my mind, certainly not. I think the Chinese, of course, have probably gone to the other extreme. They have done almost all they can to get not only Chinese, in fact, they have lots of people from other countries also working in their universities, and they are willing to pay dollar equivalent salaries to people to get them to come and be in their universities. And the whole idea is not only to improve the quality of the university, but also to promote the kind of collaboration you are talking about. So I think, in short, the answer is, India has not really been very open-minded on that.
So what needs to change? I mean, I know there's been a lot of conversation around national innovation policies, what we can learn from the Scandinavians and a couple of other countries. Maybe Israel is a good example, closer home. What's the missing piece? What are the 3 or 4 things, to your mind, that India needs to do to enhance the innovation capacity in the country? I'm not talking about
good. I think that's an important question. So I think that the most important thing in mind would be to promote more technology and innovation driven small companies. I think almost anywhere in the world, the small companies are really at the heart of a lot of the new innovation that happens. And the large companies, as many of you would know, often go and acquire those small companies and then bring that expertise into the company. I think that's an area, again, where we have not done a good job. Maybe on the services side, we've seen lots of startups coming up in the last few years. But if you look at manufacturing, if you look at manufacturing with a strong technology component in it, we don't see a lot of people going and starting those kind of enterprises. And a lot of that has to do with government policy, it has to do with availability of funding, it has to do with regulation. And to me, the key is really to make that happen at a much faster pace. We've done, and interestingly, we haven't even taken advantage of the few successful examples we have. Let me just give you one example. One exception in the government to this whole lack of what you could call enterprise with regard to creating more innovative enterprises and institutes is the biotechnology sector. The Department of Biotechnology in the last 10 years has created a whole lot of different mechanisms to drive innovation. And they have one program which they adapted from the US called the Small Business Innovation Research Initiative, where essentially they provide research grants to small companies. And if it's a bigger company, they give it as a loan. If it's a small company, they give it as an outright grant. And the whole idea is to help these companies do the research which can then be the basis for a product or some commercialization later. This program has been reasonably successful. It certainly helped build the industrial base in the biotech sector. But strangely enough, the other ministries and other parts of the government don't seem to be interested in diffusing those ideas into this.
Maybe lots of people who'd like to ask the professor some questions.
So I want to ask, are these Indian institutes innovative enough? IITs, IIMs, are these students innovative enough?
That's a good question. I think we have to be clear on what dimensions we are trying to measure their innovativeness. But let me tell you the positive side of it. The positive side of it is, I think historically there was no shortage of ideas. But just as I was explaining in the context of my book, what was absent was the opportunity to put those ideas into practice. And that's beginning to change. That's a good thing. For example, at least 3 of the IITs I know have set up what they call tinkering labs or some kind of an innovation lab where students can take their ideas. There is lots of equipment available, there are different materials available, there's electronic circuits, there's, basically there's a whole lot of inputs which they can use to try out their ideas and see whether they work. And I believe those labs in the IITs where they have been set up quite popular. I think the key is actually making our curriculum and the learning opportunity in these institutes much more application oriented. And even in the Indian Institute of Science, which is in the city where I come from, Bangalore, I think that's beginning to happen. We are seeing more interesting technology ideas coming out of there. I recently attended a seminar at IISc where a lot of their medical technology innovators presented some of their ideas, and surprisingly quite good. I mean, I didn't expect to see such a lot of interesting stuff happening there. So I think yes, qualified yes, there's a lot more they can do, but they're sort of going in the right direction.
I have two questions, Professor Rishi. One is you gave the example of Tata Motors and Mahindra. You said they're getting second-level companies to fill in the gaps in their technologies. Didn't understand, how is that innovation? Isn't that sourcing technology from outside? So that's just one. And two, can innovation be taught? And what are the key ingredients of an enabling ecosystem in companies?
The first question, it was actually in response to a specific thing that Indrajit was asking about open innovation. The whole philosophy of open innovation is that you don't need to have all the ideas inside. In fact, most companies find that they can't possibly have all the ideas they need inside. And I think Indrajit gave the example of P&G. P&G has an explicit target that they want 50% of their innovation ideas to come from outside the company. So I think the strength of that approach is it recognizes where you have innovation capabilities and allows you to link those up with suppliers and others who can fill in the gaps. And I think most companies do that, and it's pretty much a global trend now that nobody tries to do everything themselves. Coming to your second question about innovation training, yes, what is pretty clear is that most of us do have innate creativity, but the way we express that creativity can be quite different. Some of you might express it in the sports field, some of you might like painting, somebody might express it in cooking. But the question here is, how do we get people to express their creative capabilities in the workplace? To do that, training is actually quite helpful. And a lot of the training in the innovation space focuses on what you might broadly call creative problem solving. So there are various approaches to this. One is like the design thinking approach, which talks about how do you immerse yourself very deeply in the lives of users and therefore bring to bear a very user-driven perspective to solving problems. Or you could use a slightly more technical approach like TRIZ. TRIZ is a method developed by a Russian scientist, which essentially he said that any problem, there are only so many ways in which that problem can be solved, and he's listed them. And if you use those different methods creatively, you can actually solve almost any problem. So there's a whole range. I mean, whether you start with TRIZ, you start with this, or of course there are methods for enhancing lateral thinking, like De Bono's 6 thinking hats. So there's a whole range. You can pick and choose, and whichever of these techniques are relevant and suitable to you, it is possible to enhance innovation capability as a result.
I think one of the bigger things that we see a lot of innovation, and we don't see a lot of innovation also. I think, can India go far without focusing on technology innovation? I mean, manufacturing and technical innovation. We churn out hundreds and thousands of engineers. There are so many colleges. And without any focus, major focus on the engineering products that surround our lives every day, be it cars or whatever, focusing on services is largely an easy way out kind of thing. And somehow we are not even, an easy way out could be for the short term. What happens to the long term when nobody is focusing on the best things? Everything is being borrowed from abroad. Either we tie up or we allow the MNCs to come into India and we think India is growing, and then suddenly they don't come back and we start jumping because they don't come the way we want them to be. Why is there no, is that being addressed? Is there a focus on bringing out a manufacturing technical innovation stream and specializing in a particular industry? There's no industry that we can boast of saying that we are good at this. If Japan isn't good in this, if US isn't good in 2-3 sectors, we have not identified.
I think Kiran Karnik is here. At least we are good in software. We're supposed to be, right? So we shouldn't say there's no industry in which we are good, right?
Yeah. Services. If the focus, if you take away from services, if you put into long-term manufacturing build-up of the country.
I think the first thing is we should recognize that innovation has various dimensions. Even if you look at innovation within the company, there are at least 4 different types. There's product innovation, there's process innovation, there's a customer experience innovation, there's business model innovation. Now, particularly for business model innovation, technological innovation is not a necessity. If you look at our mobile services companies, for example, they have done a fair amount of innovation in the business model, though they have really not done a whole lot in terms of technology. So I think the first point is it is possible to be innovative without necessarily innovating in technology. Second point which I need to make here is that as far as India as a country is concerned, and here I'm not taking the perspective of an individual company, I would definitely agree with you that as a country which has aspirations of being, whatever, developed country and all the rest, clearly we need to have a strong manufacturing sector, and technological innovation is a fairly integral part of manufacturing. Now, what is the government doing to address that? That's a million-dollar question. I think the government at some level recognizes this is an issue. Several years ago, I think more than about a decade ago, we set up the National Manufacturing Competitiveness Council under the chairmanship of V. Krishnamurthy. More recently, there have been several task forces in the Planning Commission, including ones headed by Arun Maira and others, which have tried to focus on this issue. I think the whole thing gets stuck because we don't want to move back into a protectionist kind of a mindset. We want to be an open economy. We want to be open to companies coming in, imports coming in. At the same time, we recognize we need to build Indian companies' technological capabilities. And as you know, we've also signed WTO, so there are certain kinds of things we can't do if we want to be consistent with our WTO obligations. So how do you navigate this whole space in order to do that is the question. I don't think the government has really found a clear answer to this so far. Other countries have certainly been much more successful, but they also seem to be much more creative. I mean, that could open up another question. In fact, I attended a talk by Baba Kalyani, the CEO of Bharat Forge, a few months ago. And his whole theme of his talk was that if where innovation is really required today is in terms of the government and policy and things like that, and firms are already quite capable of doing innovation. All they need is innovation to happen at that level for their innovation energies to be unleashed. So I'm sorry, it's a pretty maybe long-winded answer. So I think we recognize the problem, but we don't know what to do. I think that's the short answer to your question.
It was a very interesting discussion. One of the core part of my, jobs is to lead ideas and also, structure thoughts within employees to kind of work on projects which are cross-functional. So one of the challenges that we have faced is that, it is very difficult to sustain such projects. People tend to get back to their regular work and not, work on innovative ideas, because at the end of the day, they have to deliver. They have to work on their core, KRAs, etc. So I would like you to comment on it and how, organizations can work well to sustain these kind of projects.
What companies have done to solve this problem, and by the way, it's not an unusual problem. What companies have done to solve this problem is essentially operate in the form of creative campaigns. So what this consists of is the following. One is that companies have chosen to take one theme or one dominant slogan, if you like, for innovation at a time and run that more in a campaign mode so that you keep up the excitement and so on. One company which has been very successful in doing this is Titan. So Titan, just to give you one example, every year they choose a theme for innovation for that year, and then they run a whole lot of contests, campaigns, encourage participation around that theme. One of their most successful innovation campaigns was in 2008, where they adopted the slogan of simplify and automate. This whole simplify and automate campaign was essentially trying to figure out how do we make jewelry manufacture less labor intensive so that we can increase the productivity of our workforce in jewelry. Once they had set up this campaign, they ran a whole series of projects across the organization to find out ways of automating different parts of the manufacturing process. One of the big outcomes of this program was something called a diamond bagging machine. which is essentially a robot which is able to pick up the right diamonds which will fit in a particular piece of jewelry, put them together so that they could actually be placed on the piece of jewelry. Before this process was being done completely manually, and about 180 people were involved in picking out those diamonds. This jewelry bagging robot now I think has reduced that, and all those people are now being used for a whole lot of other things in the company. So Titan has some figure which suggests that 30% of the profitability, or I should say the extra profitability in jewelry in the last few years has come from productivity improvements like this. But they change the slogan every year. So every year they focus on something else. This is so that people don't get bored, that you can create new momentum. And essentially what all this does is trying to focus idea management on a problem or a priority which is valuable to the company at that particular point of time. And that's something the top management or a group of people needs to identify. Then it becomes much easier to just focus on that. Once you've achieved some traction with that, you move on to the next campaign. That's one way of, I think, addressing that problem.
On that note, I'd like to thank you, Professor, for your very, very insightful and incisive session.